Hey, what's up, everybody? How you guys doing? Welcome to episode 12 of the Real Estate Talk. I'm Abel.
I'm Burhan.
What's up, Brian?
How you doing today, Abel?
I'm all right. Election week, a lot of tension and a lot of things going on around here. We got election coming up this coming Tuesday.
Tuesday, November 5th, correct.
Real telling times in our history, right? We don't really like to talk politics in this podcast. We mainly stick to real estate and real estate related things, but I think it's a very telling time in our history, right? We're not gonna talk about it or say, but this week the election is coming up, so
Yep, and everyone should still go out and vote.
Definitely.
If you're a U.S. citizen, you should still use your right, exercise your power to go out and give your support to vote for whoever you want to vote for.
Exactly. It's a very advantage that a lot of us don't take, that other people don't really have in other parts of the world. So we actually can make our voice heard by going out and voting and doing those things. So by the time this episode comes, we'll already know who our future president's going to be.
Exactly.
But it is a very funny time right now, right? I guess you can say.
Yep. And a lot of people have this mindset that, I'm just one vote, it's not going to make a difference.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if everyone had that mindset and no one voted, then what would happen?
Exactly. And the funny thing, I mean, that brings us to like where we're at. We can't avoid politics, right? We're in the DC metropolitan area, so it's the capital, essentially, literally the capital of our
country,
whole government system in this country. So a lot of people move to this area because of work. A lot of people move to this area because they're either involved in politics or something brings them to where they have to be in this DC metropolitan area. With that said, a lot of people think they come to DC and that they have to live in DC, but they don't, right? You can work in DC and not live in DC, which a lot of people do. So, for example, where DC is located, it's surrounded by Virginia and Maryland, and a lot of people commute to DC to work, but they live in those outskirts places.
Correct. And there are so many ways people commute. You can just drive, going up 395 to DC. Mm-hmm. You can take different railway expresses, whether it's the Metro, whether it's the Virginia Railway Express, or take buses. Mm-hmm. There are so many different ways all the workers commute to DC, whether they work for the government, whether they work for a private sector. Everyone has different options. And these days with telecommuting, ever since COVID, when everyone was working from home, a lot of companies, they have 2-day work weeks, 3-day work weeks. Because, you don't want to work from home every day. But at the same time, they came up with a schedule where, okay, we want you to come to work.
Hybrid.
Yeah, that's what it's called. Yeah. Come to work twice a week or something like that.
Exactly. So, as everyone knows, I'm new to this area. So people tell me, I think the traffic is terrible here. But people are like, yeah, you should have seen it before COVID. So it used to be a lot worse, apparently.
Correct.
And then it's actually real interesting to be a real estate agent in this part of the country, right? Because when you live in this part or do work or do business in this part of the country, you have to get multiple licenses, essentially, if you want to be a good agent. So you have Virginia, you need a license for Virginia. You need a license for DC. You need a license for Maryland.
Correct.
There are some people that have licenses for all the way up to Delaware and even West Virginia, because all of these places are within a couple hours of a drive to get to.
Correct. Now, if you want to be licensed in all these jurisdictions, you have to pass the national exam and state exam. Mm-hmm. Through reciprocity, you can't get licensed in all of these jurisdictions.
Yeah.
And West Virginia, believe it or not, from Alexandria, it's only about an hour. Charleston, West Virginia.
You were telling me that the other day, and I was like, really? Like I get shocked because living in California, going to another state is a 5-hour drive. So there are times where I'm actually in 3 different places in one day, one outing, right? So I'll start in Virginia, pass through DC, end up in Maryland and back, and that blows my mind each time. I think this is a very hybrid spot in that sense, right?
Correct, exactly. But California, as you mentioned, you're licensed in the same state, and you just drive how many hours to get from like LA to San Francisco?
Yeah, that's like a 7-8 hour drive. So most people, if they're realtors there, it's Southern California, and even if you're in Southern California, you're probably just in the general Los Angeles County area, and then you got your San Diego and all that, and then up north is the way it is. In this area, it's a lot different. Like I mean, you're licensed in Maryland, DC, and Virginia.
Correct.
I'm licensed in Maryland and Virginia, working on my DC license. As far as the agents in this area, like most people are like that. There are people that are specifically just Virginia licensed or just Maryland licensed, but as an agent, it doesn't serve you to just have one license when you're so close to everything, right?
Correct, because let's say you're a licensed agent working under a brokerage, and you get a referral, but they want to buy a house across the river in PG County, and unfortunately, you cannot help them buy a house or give them that service because you don't have the license.
Exactly.
So it's in your best interest as an agent to just go ahead and through reciprocity take that state exam and get your license.
That's true, because if you pass the national exam, you don't have to take the national exam again. So you just have to get your license for each of the states and take those state exams.
Correct.
With that being said, like if people wanted to move to the DC metropolitan area, or just had a job opportunity in this area, and it's in DC, you don't necessarily have to live in DC to take that job offer, right? So if you get a job offer, and that's for anybody that's out there that's watching, and they get it in DC, that doesn't mean you have to start looking at housing in DC. The great part about that is that, honestly, majority of the people that work in DC don't live in DC.
That's true. They actually live in either Virginia or Maryland.
Exactly.
Most people, they work in DC because that's where all of the job opportunities are. But you can commute to DC, and as we stated earlier, most people, even though the job or the employer is actually located in DC, they just work from home.
Exactly. And that gives you get an opportunity to get more bang for your buck, essentially, right? So
correct.
DC housing is ridiculous. I mean, they're in the millions. They're high 800,000 and up.
Well, it depends.
Depends on the area that you're in.
Where you're located in DC, you got $1 million. We're talking about Georgetown. So I was reading this article the other day.
Yeah.
There was a townhouse that just sold in Georgetown. Do you know how much it sold for?
How much did it sell for?
$11 million.
Sheesh.
In Georgetown.
Yeah.
So if you want to go for Georgetown or go for Northwest DC for areas like Tenleytown, then yeah, it's going to cost you a pretty penny.
Yeah, and I mean, those are sought after areas. But I mean, not everybody wants to live in Georgetown, or honestly, not everybody wants to live in DC. They want the advantage of being able to work in DC, but they want to be able to live a little bit outskirts. So you got your Southern Maryland, where housing is a little bit more affordable.
Correct.
Places like La Plata, Waldorf, Charles County, right?
Charles County is a great area. So years ago, Charles County was cheap, but so many people are moving there, especially if they have a work from home job, because there are a lot. We touched on it earlier. There are a lot of telecommute jobs where you never have to report to work. Everything has changed ever since COVID, and people are just buying houses there and living there and working from home permanently.
Yeah.
So they have a preference of moving there simply because of the cost per square foot that they're getting on the house.
You get more bang for your buck, essentially, right?
Correct.
More land, more house.
More land and more house.
Exactly. Versus, I mean, if people that do live in, like you said, if you're living in Georgetown and you're buying a house or a townhome for $11 million,
yeah,
imagine what that $11 million will get you in Charles County,
yeah,
if you're in that position. But I also understand why people would want to be in DC for that convenience to be able to be in DC, right? So I always feel like DC is more for young professionals and people that really don't have families and are young and still up and coming in their career, versus the people that live in Maryland or Virginia that's that work in DC are more established, have a family, need more space, and things like that nature, right?
Correct. And DC, it has a lot of different opportunities, especially when real estate is concerned. If you were to buy, let's say, a townhouse in DC, then your appreciation rate is significantly higher. For example, the $11 million house, we can touch on that.
Yeah.
In 5 to 10 years, that might be worth $15 million or even higher. Who knows?
Higher, yeah.
So from an investor standpoint, you can definitely go after those houses if you want to take that kind of risk.
And that's true. And we always talk about how DC in the 80s is not what DC is now. And how, there was, and I always make that analogy with you as far as why I like to invest in Baltimore or look at property in Baltimore, because I see that as it being what DC was in the 80s and how it's changing into that. And we can definitely touch on that later on. But what are some advantages for realtors here that have all those licenses? So if you have all three licenses, the major parts that we're talking about, and we can touch on Delaware and West Virginia as well, too.
So one more thing I wanted to touch on DC for realtors, there's TOPA. TOPA basically means if someone is selling their house, but a tenant is living there, the tenant has first right to purchase the house. And you have to present the tenant rights to the house. And if the tenant doesn't want to purchase the house, then they can go ahead and sell the house.
Yeah.
So that's one difference. Another difference is dual agency. In Virginia, dual agency is allowed. However, I'm not fond of dual agency because you're basically representing both sides at the same time. Dual agency is defined as you're my buyer and then another friend is my seller, right? I'm representing you and the seller simultaneously. I've done a few of those deals. It's really uncomfortable because you both get emotional at the same time throughout the transaction, right? And it's best as agents to only represent one side of the transaction.
Yeah.
Even if they're under the same brokerage, that's fine. But it's really difficult for one agent to represent both sides of the transaction. And dual agency, again, is legal in Virginia, but it's not allowed in the state of Maryland.
Yeah, which is that's a great point too. So just real quick with TOPA, that's Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. So this was an act that was instilled by the DC government to give tenants the first opportunity to purchase a home if the landlord decides to sell it. So
correct.
If he wants to put the house on the market 30 days beforehand, he has to give the tenant the opportunity to purchase that property before he can put it on the market. Now, if the tenant can't afford it or doesn't want to purchase it, then he can go ahead and put it on the market, or she can put it on the market. Why do you think DC created that law? DC
created that law because they were very heavy on protecting the tenants. I always put it in these terms. I think Virginia is more of a landlord-friendly state. I think Maryland, I still think it's more of a landlord-friendly state because if the tenant simply doesn't pay the bill, you can take him to court and get him evicted. DC is a tenant-friendly state. So if the tenant doesn't pay the bill, it's really hard to get him evicted.
Yeah.
And then TOPA was added. So let's compare all three, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. Let's say, you're my tenant and I want to sell my house, right? I don't want to sell it to you, but your lease is ending. I give you 60-day notice that you have to get out of my house. In Virginia and Maryland, I can tell you, hey, get out, I'm selling. But in DC, I have to give you the right to purchase
purchase that house, yeah.
Yeah, before anyone else has rights.
And in a way, that can be a good thing, right? For tenants, if people are looking for something that's tenant friendly, TOPA's it could be a great thing. But a lot of those times, that tenant that's renting doesn't have the funds or the capital to purchase that property. But it's kind of good to have that opportunity to before anybody else. So if before the house goes on the market, for some landlords, it might be just easier to do that way, right? Instead of...
Well, it's case by case because these days, with all of the different loan options that are out there, the tenant, you just imagine, Abel, you're renting a house, you fall in love with the house. The tenant's going to try their best to maintain residency at that property.
Yeah.
But for the landlord, sometimes from an investor's point of view, they just want to allocate their assets.
Yeah.
So that's where it becomes complicated.
And yeah, that's true. But again, for people that are just looking for somewhere where it's tenant friendly, DC is great in that aspect.
Yeah,
and
DC is very tenant friendly.
Yeah.
It's similar, and we're not licensed in New York, nor I don't think we're going to get licensed in New York ever. But New York is very tenant friendly too because of how the landlords treat the tenants over there.
Yeah.
I've heard horror stories about real estate in New York.
Yeah.
And the landlord tenant act over there. But DC adapted a lot of those real estate rules and regulations,
which kind of makes sense. And then and you also touched on dual agency. So dual agency essentially means as an agent, we represent the buyer and the seller at the same time.
The same transaction, correct.
Which that's allowed in Virginia. It's not allowed in Maryland, and it's not allowed in DC.
Correct.
I'm like you stated, we're not fans of dual agency because as an agent, you and I both agree on this, is we want to represent our client to the fullest that we can, right? So if we are in a dual position where we're representing the seller and the buyer, we're not doing either of them our service to its full ability, right?
Exactly, because if, let's say you're representing both, and again, I've done this a few times in the state of Virginia, it becomes very difficult because we're representing just one buyer, one seller. Mm-hmm. They were going to push to our maximum capacity to do what's in their best interest.
Yeah.
Right? But when we're representing both sides, especially when emotions get involved, it becomes a mess. I've experienced it myself.
Or even disclosing certain things, right? So
Exactly.
you're in a position where you're just kind of stuck as an agent. It could be very stressful as an agent, but for anybody that's out there and they have an agent that's also representing the seller, you kind of got to take that with a grain of salt too, because he's not going to give you the full information. He can't. He owes discreetness to his client, and he owes discreetness to you. He can't go and tell his client, hey, this client can purchase up to $20,000, and I'm just throwing a number out there, and say, even though the house is up for $10,000, he can afford $20,000. He can't do that.
Exactly.
So, and you don't want an agent that can do that. And for the agents that are out there that are watching as well, you don't want to be in that position, right? And for people that are looking for reliable agents, that's a kind of question that you should be asking your agent, right? Are you okay with dual agency? Do you do dual agency? Do you have any properties that are on the market right now that you're going to show me? And if you do, like, how does that work for you? You know what I mean? Like, and that's in
Exactly.
Virginia mainly, but for those people out there, you want to do that. You want to ask those questions so that you want somebody that's going to give you his full attention, his full what's the wording I'm looking for? His full I can't think of the word right now.
This is I always throw this metaphor out there when it comes to dual agency.
Yeah.
Imagine you're in court and you got the plaintiff and you got the defendant, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a major court case, whether you got a divorce, whatever kind of court case it is.
Yeah.
But you'll have attorneys on each side, right? Mm-hmm. How would you feel, Abel, if you had the same attorney represented the plaintiff and the defendant?
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you?
It doesn't, right?
Then how does dual agency make any sense? Again, I've done it a handful of times, but I started thinking I had terrible experiences throughout dual agency, and I'm against it.
Yeah.
I would rather represent one side, and even under the same brokerage, have another agent represent the other side, because it becomes an emotional problem.
Yeah, and I mean, now to say that there are certain instances where dual agency would make sense, right? If you have a buyer, and then you have a seller that you're working with, and there's no issues going into purchasing this house, and it's an easy transaction, or if it's family members, or
something quick and simple. Let's say you have land for like $50,000. Quick and easy, that's fine. But on more complicated transactions, it can be very, very severe, and it can become a huge headache in the end.
And to be honest, that's something that the client has the power to. So in the broker agreement, in the buyer broker agreement, there is a section that allows you to say yes, I agree for you to have dual agency,
or
or
say
no.
no, I don't want dual agency.
And you have that full power as a client, as the buyer, the seller. You have that ability to tell them like, hey, I don't want any transactions that have dual agency. Now some people might not want to do that, because if, let's say, Brian, you're representing me, and you have a property that I really like, that you're listing, but you're helping me find a home, and if I really like that property, in the agreement, if I say no dual agency, now you can't show me that property.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
it has its pros and cons.
It's pros and cons.
But going back to what you said, it's pretty funny. Most buyers and sellers that we represent, I say about 90% plus.
Yeah.
They never read the agreements, the contracts.
Just sign what they need to sign.
They just sign. You know, I joke around with everyone, hey, what if it says in the agreement you owe me $1 million?
Exactly.
They just don't read it.
You got to do that to the multi-rich ones, so we can, just take the rest of the year off. So with that being said, like, for the people that are out there listening that are in Nebraska, California, Wisconsin, whatever, and they have a job offer in the DC metropolitan area. So when we say the DC metropolitan area, we're talking obviously DC and all the surrounding places in DC.
Basically, it's the Beltway. So the Beltway here is 495, and then the outskirts of 495. That pretty much defines the DC metro area.
Yeah, which it can be Arlington all the way down to even Stafford.
Correct.
Essentially, and then all the way up to Baltimore, essentially. I know people that live in Baltimore because it's cheaper to buy a home there and come to work in DC.
Correct.
That's very common in this area. So if you're out there and you have an opportunity to come out here, because this is a very strong job market, then that's the other thing that is hybrid about this area is the federal government ain't going anywhere.
Yeah, we all know that.
Right? So any jobs in that sector, they're going to be needed. Even working at a McDonald's in DC, like those places are not going to be closing down anytime soon.
And they actually get paid pretty well.
Yeah, in DC. So DC minimum wage is a little bit better. But we say that to say you want to be able to get an agent that's licensed in all those places and knows the area fairly well, like Brian and myself. You don't want to be boxed in. You're thinking, hey, I'm moving to, or I got a job offer in DC. I need to start looking at homes in DC. And then you go find an agent that's only licensed in DC. Well, now you're doing yourself a disservice, because you can go a little bit out of DC and find homes that you can afford and that you'll like and that you can commute to.
Exactly.
So you be mindful for those that are out of state that are thinking about moving to this area. Be mindful with the type of agents that you get. You want somebody that's going to be able to represent you well, one, and be able to know the area fairly well. Most of the agents that are licensed in all three jurisdictions, they know all three jurisdictions very well. Now, they may specialize or do more business in a certain part of the area here, but having those licenses makes you familiar with at least everything. So they're able to give you an educated yes to where they think you should land or fall or live in.
And by being licensed in all three jurisdictions, then you have a lot more knowledge of the differences, and you're just better educated, and you do more of a service to your client. For example, attorneys. I know I've touched on a couple different examples of attorneys, but an attorney that's licensed in DC, Maryland, Virginia will know a little more than attorneys just licensed in Virginia, right?
Exactly.
Same thing applies.
Exactly. So let's touch on some points. So people think like, hey, if I live in DC, or if I live in the outskirts of DC, does that mean I have to go to DC for entertainment, for nightlife, for gambling, whatever? Obviously, DC doesn't have casinos, but there's MGM, which is in Maryland, and Oxon Hill. Mm-hmm. We have the Springfield Mall, the Potomac Mills. There's also Crystal City. Not everything is in DC. There's things that are outskirts of DC. Now, obviously, the major sports they don't only the Wizards and the Capitals play actually inside of DC. So the Commanders play.
No, actually, the Nationals too. The Washington
Nats. Yep. I'm sorry about that. So we have 3 sports that are
in DC,
in actually inside DC, and then you have the Commanders who are not in DC. I remember going to a Nationals game, and we don't drive there. Then that's the great thing. So we'll drive to a metro station, Huntington Station, and then we take the train to the stadium. Same thing we did when we went to go see the Wizards play.
Yep.
So that's also that. So if you do choose to not have to deal with the parking and the traffic in DC, you can drive to a nearest train station, park your car there, and then take the train there.
Exactly. That's the awesome part. And so going back to the train stations, a lot of people, they take the VRE to go to DC. And let's say you want to buy a house, but you can't afford, not 11 million like in Georgetown, but, insane prices, 800, 900, a million. You can only afford $500,000 or less. You can always look for a house in Prince William County or even Stafford or even Fredericksburg, or Manassas, because the VRE goes down to Manassas for somewhere around $500,000. And you can look around the VRE stations over there. And then you can always take the train and head up to DC.
And the DC area, Alexandria, they don't really have new builds in that the closer you are to the DC area, the older the homes are, the more developed
Correct.
The communities are. So for those people that are interested in a new build or want to build a home from scratch, when you go further out to places like you said, Stafford, Fredericksburg, La Plata, these are all areas that are developing and they're building newer homes, houses, new communities. Yeah. Yep. So those are some of the advantages as well too. So you can get in these communities at the entry level price, and then build your equity there as the area starts to develop more.
And what's interesting is, if you want, you can always buy land. We touched on it. You can go all the way down to Stafford County, or in Maryland, you can go all the way down to La Plata, buy land, and then when you purchase land, you have to go through a feasibility period. But later, if you get the proper permits, you can just build a house there.
Exactly.
Yep. The pricing is usually, depending on the builder, you can purchase land and then build for around, $100 per square foot to $150 per square foot. But just do the math, 100 times 3,000 square feet, or even cheaper if you have a great builder. Then you can end up getting a brand new house for like $300,000 plus the price of the land.
Exactly.
And that's much better than buying a brand new house for, $600,000, $700,000.
Exactly. And for those that are coming from out of state that are thinking about moving to this area, I do the approach that we did, right? So we looked at homes while we were still out of state, but we didn't want to jump in and buy a home just yet until we knew where we wanted to be at, right? So we rented for 10 months, which was not a problem for us because that gave us the time to actually put our foot on the ground, find a good, at the time I was still trying to get my license situated here. So, we had you help us looking at property, but when you're physically there and you give yourself 6 months to a year to kind of figure out, all right, I'm going to work here. I'm going to figure out what the commutes are, understand what everything is. And then in that meantime, you find agents like myself and Burhan, and then we just guide you in the right direction to where you want to be, right? We can figure out what your needs are, what you want to give up versus what you must have and things like that. So that's also highly recommended. I'm not a big fan of buying property sight unseen. There's a lot of people that do that.
They do. Yeah.
Also, this goes for our people that are out there that are in the military. Thank you for your services, first and foremost. But there are times where you have to come out to the DC metropolitan area. As for Belvoir is here. Quantico is also here. A lot of military bases are based out of, no pun intended, based out of the DMV area.
Correct.
So we do get a lot of military that comes in, and obviously they have assignments where they're somewhere for 3 to 5 years and they go elsewhere and things like that. So
and they're actually qualified for the VA loan. So everyone from the military doesn't have to put any money down, 0% down. Now they do have to cover for a closing cost, Well, that's where we come in, and we can negotiate and try to get them some closing cost help, so they can walk away without bringing any money to the closing table.
Exactly.
And
So
that would be great. Now, here's another crazy fact about VA loans. If there's an existing loan on the mortgage and it's a VA loan,
you can assume that loan.
they can assume that loan. What if that loan has a rate of like 3% or less?
Yeah.
They can assume it if it's a VA loan. They can just transfer it over to the new buyer as long as they're from the military or qualify for a VA loan. Most people don't know that fact.
Yeah.
So we can help them. If they're from the military or qualify for a VA loan, we can just set up an intro and then do our due diligence depending on where they're looking and get them a great deal. A lot of people don't, investigate that and see what's in the best interest of the buyer.
Yeah. And also, just outside of just the military and the federal government, a lot of these Fortune 500 companies are moving to this area.
Correct.
So we have Amazon that's in this area. We have Boeing, who just recently came to this area.
No, I think Boeing has been here for a minute, but
With more than 10 years?
more than 10 years, yeah.
Well,
I may be
because they
wrong.
used to be headquartered in Seattle. And again, you guys can comment in the area, but to my knowledge, I thought it was in the last 10 years. So,
They're here. The Washington Post is here.
yes,
There's a lot of big companies here. And what that does is that creates a lot of jobs.
exactly.
So that's why our area is kind of protected, not just the government, but all these other large companies are here.
Yeah. Fun fact, one of my favorite Mars candy bars, Mars, the candy company, is also based out of here. I didn't know that.
Nice.
That was kind of cool. So yeah, that's kind of what we wanted to touch on today, right? Just what
Correct.
the DC metropolitan area, the things that if you were thinking about moving over here, what you can do and where you can move and how you can go about that. Anything else that you wanted to touch on?
No, just that this is a great time. We touched on at the beginning where we, the results will already be out of who won the election.
Yeah.
But this is a great time for a lot of people during the winter to look for a great deal on the housing market.
Exactly.
And people, we may have touched this on one of the earlier episodes. People typically wait until the spring to buy, but that's when all the buyers will jump into the housing market. But why wait till then? Why not look right now in the winter when everyone else is celebrating the holidays?
Exactly.
Now's a better time to get a deal.
And we've touched on this in other episodes, but people are scared of the interest rate. No, it's not something that you should be scared of. Like that's something that is easily fixable, because when you come in at a higher interest rate, obviously the cost of the house is going to be cheaper. But once those interest rates drop,
Prices are gonna
the prices are going to go up. That's a proven fact. You're not going to have prices drop and interest rates drop. It's going to have to offset in some sort of a way. So,
One of the classic sayings is everyone knows Warren Buffett.
Mm-hmm.
Warren Buffett, he has like $250 billion cash sitting in his bank right now.
Mm-hmm.
And he always says, when everyone is scared, that's when you buy. And then when everyone is buying, that's when you go on the sidelines.
exactly.
So you always got to pay attention to
Pay
that.
attention to those things. And yeah, I mean, it's just the housing market. A lot of people they fear it, or they have anxiety of mortgages and things like that. But to me, it's one of the best and safest investments you can make.
Yep. And you just got to take that giant step, even if it's the first giant step in your life as an investment. And that's what we're here to help you for.
Yeah, exactly. So with that said, we're gonna end it here. We do appreciate you guys. We've made it to 12 episodes, which is awesome.
Yep.
Guys, keep liking, subscribing those channels that we have and that we put out. If you have any questions, concerns, feel free to reach out to us. We're available to you guys anytime. Our emails and our contact info is all down there. Reach out to us. Let us help you in the journey, or let us answer some real estate questions for you.
For sure.
My name is Abel,
My name is Burhan.
and this is the Real Estate Talk. We'll see you guys next week.
Have a good one, guys.